worth, but they're worth a lot more than a nickel used to be. I do know that. And so we had to work hard for those. I remember one thing when I went to the major school as a grade school child, and it was just another school like all of this. But I had a very interesting teacher, and after every Wednesday, he was also an LDS man. After every Wednesday through class, he would have religion class. Now, we didn't have seminary in those days, but we had religion class, which was about the same thing, I would say, as their seminary is today, only that it just came once a week. Like at primary was one day, religion class another day. And I learned many wonderful things from him. I remember one thing as I was a girl of a young man that was in our class, saying that he had had his patriarchal blessing. I was only about in 5th grade then. And he said in his patriarchal blessing, he said he would live to see the coming of the Savior. So of course that was thrilling and exciting. We never ever did forget that. We figured he was, you know, the same age we were. Maybe we could all live to see the coming of the Savior. But things kept going at the same pace, you might say, only stepping up a little bit each year and changing. And I hadn't realized the changes until I sit down and stop and think about it. We had no cars, even. We did have carriages. My mother said they didn't have carriages in her early years, but we had horses and buggies. And we would go as far as Lehigh, probably in them. But that as far as I ever did go. I never did get to Salt Lake, only on the train. And whenever we went anywhere, we went on the train, any distance. And then just a short trips, we would use the horses and the carriages. And they put up hay with horses. They did the plowing. My father had a piece of ground that he farmed because he had 5 boys in a row. And he had a piece of ground that he farmed down south of town, halfway between Springville and Provo. And he also had a piece of ground right where the Brigham Young University has their buildings today. I don't know just which building he told me it was, whether it was the Fletcher building. There wasn't another building right there close to where the Fletcher is. We owned that. My father owned that piece of ground. When the boys were growing up, and I can remember him bringing in, watching for hours as I'd sit there and watch them bring in that hay. And they'd pull it up a little forkful at a time and pull it up on a rope, and then they would slide it on over into the barn to keep it dry for the winter. With the horses, and we always had a cow, and a few pigs. Of course, the pigs, I guess, didn't eat hay. In those days, they used to eat lots of dishwater plus grain. And I don't know what they feed their hogs today, but it was very similar to what they fed them when I was, right after we was married. My husband grew hogs for 4 or 5 years after we were married. It was his big cash crop before he went into the sheep. But then after we had that kind of transportation, then we witnessed the beginning of the first cars in Provo. I can very well remember seeing the first car. I bet you boys can't remember the first car, can you? Even around your place. But it was the first car in as big a pretty city as Provo. Provo wasn't as big as it is today by any means, but it was the first car. And then first thing I know, there was 2 or 3 others. And before I knew it, there was about a half a dozen. And then along about that time, my people would go together in families, 3 or 4 different families. Now, my oldest brother and my father each paid half on a car, and they had the car. But all we used it for, I draw your attention to this, because all we used it for was to play. And when Gary mentioned today what he used his plane for was to play, I thought of that, because that's what we used cars for in the beginning, was to play. We never thought of going anyplace. We always walked to school clear until I graduated from high school. And I went to the BYU high school. They had a grade school and a high school, as well as a college when I went to school there. And I graduated there. Let's see, what might I have any other questions about those dance in those days when we played ball? But anyway, we had this dance, and that was my first date I ever had with your grandfather and grandfather. Randall. What else might I tell you?
Dance. Your first date was big dance.
Mother, you told a story to me once about you driving a car up the canyon and it wouldn't run.
Okay.
Tell that story.
I happened to be the only one in our family to drive. Of course, my brother, like I say, owned half of it, and he used to drive there for their family, and for ours. My father was deaf. All my knowing life of him, he never could hear. But he could tell from what we said by the movement of our lips. And so we would talk to him just like this, and he would know what we said if we looked at him. But anyway, he didn't dare drive for that reason. And then my sister, the one who just passed away a few hours ago, was so nervous, even as a young girl, that she didn't want to learn. So I was the only one left in the family to drive. So I drove from the time I was 14 years old. We had to have no driver's license, had to have no car license. None of these restrictions you have to the on cars today. You just bought the car and went. That was all there was to it. So we took a trip at St. Logan, where my brother was teaching at the Utah State there. He was teaching art. He was head of the art department for years there, till he retired, in fact. And when we got up there, we decided to go up Logan Canyon. I guess most of you have been up Logan Canyon, but it's a beautiful canyon. And we went up the canyon, and when we got ready to come home, the car wouldn't start. And my oldest sister, Sarah, Sadie we called her, husband had a Ford. Ours was an Overland. An Overland was a wealthy car. A Ford was just a little Ford.
Mercedes.
That was the attitude we had for it. But anyway, that little Ford had to pull our Overland down. And it was most embarrassing. You can't imagine. It was into a service station. And I told the man I was driving, I says, I don't want to do this, car will not run. And he lifted up the hood and looked at the wall. Well, if you put some gas in it, you run. Apparently, in those days, the way they registered the amount of gas you had was a cork. You've seen these corks that they put in bottle juice too? Well, when that would get raised up, it would say that it was full. And then it would go down and say it's empty. Well, apparently it's stuck. So I said the car was full of gas and it was empty. So that was one experience we had with that. Another experience I remember Father telling about was that, I remember it so well, his history is just full of interesting things, which most of you, I think, have already read. But this one thing I think is worth repeating because it's very good. But he said that there was a new church starting in Provo, and it was called the Godbeites. And it was very similar to the LDS.
Wasn't that Salt Lake, maybe?
Maybe it was Salt Lake. One is a boy, one or the other.
I think it was Salt Lake.
Maybe it was Salt Lake, but anyway, they. Is there anything else I told wrong?
No.
Excuse me,
great.
because I
This
just
is
made
my story.
I forget, you know. But anyway, that he was walking along the street and he said he heard someone behind him and he said, "Stay with the good ship Zion." And he looked around. Who's talking to him? He says, "Who's there?" Nobody there. So he went on walking down the street and the voice came again, "Stay with the good ship Zion." And then it just dawned on him when there was nobody there that the voice had come from somewhere else. So with him, he always stayed with the good ship Zion all his life. Do you have any questions, or have I taken too much time already?
No, you haven't.
Actually, listening to you forever.
Okay. I guess it goes to you, Ellen.
To me? Well, I tell you a little bit about Aunt Eula, because she was very much a part of my childhood. On almost, at least once or twice or 3 times a month on Sunday afternoon. We always had Sunday school and sacrament meeting, didn't we? Anyway, did we? We had sacrament meeting and Sunday school. What did we have? We had Sunday school in the morning, and at night we had sacrament meeting.
Right.
And we had a period of time in the middle of the afternoon. It was a long period, it seemed like to me as a child, between Sunday school and sacrament meeting. But at least twice, and sometimes 3 times a month, we went to Aunt Eula's. And I got a college education in horticulture there. She grew the most beautiful flowers. They were tall, they were short, they were yellow, they were pink, and they grew all over her yard. And every Sunday, not every Sunday, every Sunday they did this. We went through every flower. We discussed what made them grow, why they were what they were, and all of those things. So if I can name a flower today, it reverts back to that time when I was a child and I went to my Aunt Eula's place. Because she had a flower garden that looks like Temple Square nowadays. It was always like that. On the other Sundays, they would come to Mother's. They alternated almost every Sunday. And when they came to Mother's, we went through the same thing, except Mother didn't have quite as many flowers as Aunt Eula did.
I mean, I'm sweaty. Sorry, I think it's
That's all right.
Flower garden's ready.
Another very special experience for me was my Aunt Eula and my Uncle Charles, who I loved dearly. He teased me perpetually, always teased me. But I remember one special Christmas Eve when I was still young enough to believe in Santa Claus, and there was a knock on our door after we went to bed, and there was Santa Claus. And I was really puzzled about that for years. And he came in with the whole bit and our toys and all that. I really didn't know who he was, but as the years went on, I found out that that was really my Uncle Charles. He was a bishop, and he spent a lot of time with me. I think it was before the days that the bishop had this special charge to spend a lot of time with teenagers. I mean,
School with a donkey. But I don't know how old I was. I couldn't tell you, but I know Frank was, in the 7th or 8th grade, so I must have been about in the 4th or 3rd grade. And Dad came home one time, and he had 2 donkeys, and I believe they were twins. One wouldn't go anywhere without the other one. So when we went to school on them, and at first I think we just rode them, but Frank's always went ahead, and mine always tagged behind. And we were always late for school, too, I think. You try to get a donkey to hurry. A donkey's related to a mule, and it just won't hurry. Then Dad built a donkey cart. And I was telling somebody about this not too long ago. In our school, we were about a mile away from school, but there was the Stookie cart, which was a horse-pulled cart, and it had all the Stookies in it. And then there was the donkey cart that Frank and I went to school in. I can't remember who else rode with us. And there was another cart. What was the other cart? There was another cart anyway, and they had a barn on the school grounds, and we'd bring our hay in our carts, and when we'd get there, they'd unhook the carts and put the donkeys and the horses in the barn and feed them. And then after school, we'd all meet, and Frank usually hitched it up. I tried to help him, but I was small enough, it was kind of hard for me, but he usually hitched it up, and then we'd ride home. But the 2 donkeys wouldn't go without each other. So the one donkey was hitched onto the cart, and the other donkey would trail along behind. And if the one donkey got too far behind, then the one in the cart would stop. We couldn't make it go. The other donkey got stuck or start braying. Sometimes they'd start braying, and you'd be like, But anyway, that was quite an experience getting there. And I remember one time, and maybe I'm telling tales out of school, but I remember one time Frank's, I guess in the 8th grade, in his group, left school and went up the tracks, and Preston Griggs was the teacher. So when they came back at the end of the day, he made them stay in after school. And so here I was with the donkey cart, so I didn't know what had happened to him. I was too scared to knock on the door to find out why Frank didn't come out after school. And so I waited and waited and waited, and I guess it was in the fall, because it started getting kind of twilight, the sun getting low, and I got nervous, but I still waited and waited and waited for him. And everybody had gone home except Mr. Griggs's class that he kept in there, which seemed like hours to me, but it probably wasn't. But finally he came out, and boy, he gave me a Scotch blessing. Why didn't you go home? You shouldn't have waited for me. Why didn't you go home? Mother will be worried. And he just bawled me out. And here I'd waited so faithfully. I never forgot. Mother was a little upset when we finally got home. Do you remember that? No. But I remember waiting for him that whole time. And I can remember the donkey. I think about the first time I got on it, it headed right straight out, for we had a lot of trees out kind of where Frank's house is now there. Headed right straight out to those trees and went under a limb and scraped me right off.
I'm scared to death. I never forgot that.
Yeah, they were a lot of fun, but they were kind of foxy little creatures. But then when Frank went into high school, then Dad sold them, I think, because they had to have somebody bigger than me to handle the donkey cart and feed them. But I've got some pictures of those donkeys, and they were fun. But I can remember back, I don't know whether I was in the first grade or I was pretty small, when my favorite thing, when all my sisters would go to school, and Frank, all of them, and I was there, my favorite thing was to take the spice cans and line them up like seats in a schoolroom, and then put one out front as a teacher. And I'd play with those spice cans for hours, moving the students in and out. So I guess I had an early desire to be a teacher. And then our next thing I can remember was meeting my sisters when they came home from school and going through their lunch pail to see if there was a scrap of bread or anything. That to me was the greatest, to get that lunch bucket.
I remember a little bit about some bum lambs we fed. I didn't know about that.
Yeah. My dad had sheep, and so we always had a lot of bum lambs, and you can well realize that Mother probably did most of the work, but it seemed like we all had to feed them. But bum lambs are like babies. They have to be fed every so many hours, and so we'd help her feed them at night, and then she'd get up in the middle of the night, probably twice.
Bum lambs were lambs that didn't have their mothers
I
anymore.
feed them in the middle of the night.
Yeah, they were baby lambs that were orphans, and so we'd put them in little fences around and then feed them. You know, Mother would get up in the night and feed them, and we'd help during the day. And I remember Dad making a lamb feeder. It must have been about that big, with little petitions like this and nipples on the end. We'd pour milk in it, and then each lamb would get a hold of there and drink their share, and then you'd shove them in the next pen and go over and feed the next ones. I think we had, what, as many as 20? Oh, yeah, 20, 25.
You did, I think, one time. Yeah.
And Dad also made a net pen on wheels, and he'd wheel it around. They'd eat the grass, and when we get done, we'd all go out and push it to the next spot, and they'd eat. You know, because if you let them loose, you'd be running all over the farm trying to catch bum lambs.
Tell them what you did with the money, how you got the money.
Yeah, Dad gave me some of them that last year, but it was during the war years, and
He always saw that you got all the money from the bum lambs. He sorted them out somewhere.
poor Mother, she worked the hardest, but the money I got, I put in saving bonds, U.S. saving bonds, and then after I was married, they had matured, and I got, I can't remember, it's $50 or $75, $25, I can't remember the amount now, but I had that money to start out. When we first got married, I was going to school, and Steve was going to school, so times were kind of tough there for a while, and so we had those bonds, those savings bonds that I remember at the time I wanted to buy a bicycle, the worst kind.
Oh, did you?
But it was during the war and you couldn't buy bikes. So mine went in saving bonds. But I can remember speaking to Aunt Eula too. She taught me in school in the 4th grade. And I remember I wasn't autistic at all. I couldn't even draw a square box. And she'd have us draw pictures, and if they were really good, she'd put them up around the room. And mine just wouldn't go up, and I felt so bad. I could never get one up, so one time I cheated. I went home and I traced a bird, colored it up, and took it back, and I got it up. I always had a guilty conscience. I never could draw.
No wonder you got such artists in your family.
I remember one time singing in her class, and it was near the end of the day, and And she said, "Well, now I'm going to sing all through the night." And Mr. Griggs' class and our class went together to sing. And I remember Hal Taylor speaking up and saying, "I can't. I got to go home and milk cows." Hal Taylor. The kids was older than I was.
Where's the songs come from? What do you mean? No way. No.
They even have ours in the hymn book. Utah, I love thee.
Oh, really?
That's fantastic.
And there's two hiding in the corner.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Grandma. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Grandma. Happy birthday to you.
Well, that's all I had planned, and I thank everybody for participating and coming. And
I want another
we
picture.
ought to close with a prayer, I guess. Ralph, would you like to
They're gonna
give
sit
that?
there now.
Well, we'll do that tomorrow because nothing for you.